Good afternoon, gentlemen and ladies. I'm so very pleased that you could join me here today. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Clementina Rind, and I'm very pleased that we could spend some time together on this beautiful day, this year of 1774 that we find ourselves in. I apologize if I was slightly delayed. I had some business to attend to earlier this day, and I was attempting to get the rest of the ink off my hands. This is the downside occasionally to being a printer and a writer. You always have ink on your hands. So I know that there are many things that have happened this year. And I imagine as we continue to have conversation together, we shall speak of the trials and difficulties that all of us have experienced in Virginia. For myself, it has been a time of decision, particularly the last 2 weeks. You see, I own one of the newspapers here within the city of Williamsburg, the Virginia Gazette. I hope that some of you are subscribers to my paper, and if you are not now, hopefully by the end of our conversation, you shall wish to subscribe to my paper. But my private press is not my only duty. Recently, I made the decision to petition the gentlemen of the House of Burgesses to become public printer for this colony. If you are not familiar with the terms of printing, to be public printer truly is to take all of the public documents that are put forth by the gentlemen Burgesses in our elected branch of government or by the governor and the appointed branch of government. Someone must print all of this. And the petitions were to go forward in May. It was not an easy decision for myself. In fact, I think I surprised myself when I finally decided to put forward a petition to become public printer. There's a great deal of weight that falls upon one's shoulders with such a responsibility. It was first and foremost a decision I made for my family. I have 4 wonderful children, 3 boys and 1 girl. They are between the ages of 11 and 3. And it has not been easy for us this past year. If you are not aware, my beloved husband, William Rind, who served his colony faithfully, not only as printer of his Gazette, but also as public printer, passed away last August. And at his death, I found myself in no little distress. And a great deal of hardship unfolded. And for some time, I was beginning to wonder if I would be able to continue to make a way for both myself and my children. But thankfully, through the support of the public, the people of Virginia, and also of certain gentlemen here in the city, I was able to not only maintain my husband's newspaper, but dare I say, increase and be able to print in such a way that would endeavor to set a firm foundation for myself and my household. It is first for my children that I put forward that petition, for I finally made the decision to put forward that petition. But it is not just for the security of my household, please understand. It is also because it is something that I deeply desire to do. I have already been serving as public printer under my husband's name, finishing out his contract, but this contract was to be in my name, to be able to continue the legacy, if you will, of the Rind Press. Ink has marked so much of my life. I married my husband some time ago, when I was much younger, of course, and I learned that when you marry a printer, ink will mark you whether you like it or not. And I find myself always trying to get rid of it. No matter what sort of work you do, you find it upon your hands, your clothing, your children, across the walls where your husband has dragged it, or where he used to drag it. My William left a handprint upon the north wall of our press room. And when he first left it there, I was very tempted to paint it out, but I'm very glad I did not. For you see, it reminds me of him. It reminds me of the life that we built together. It reminds me of the press that we built together. It reminds me of the masthead he chose to be open to all parties, but influenced by none. His masthead, our masthead, my masthead now, I suppose I should say, that has continued to guide me, to do everything within my power to make sure that my press, my newspaper, my attention to the duty of the gentlemen Burgesses and the governor is beyond compare. Which is why, friends, I put forward my petition this May, alongside of 4 other printers, to become this colony's public printer. And yes, I suppose I could say a great deal about the concern of the times, the fact that our gentlemen Burgesses have landed themselves in a great deal of trouble with the governor, the fact that Boston, even as we speak, is suffering from an unbearable burden that has been laid upon their shoulders by Parliament. And I suppose all of this is concerning to me, it truly is, but the thing that burns brightest in my mind are the 4 little rascals who are up the street in my house. It is for them that every day I walk into the press room and I put ink on my hands. Forgive me, friends, I did not mean to ramble on. You have caught out a very bad habit of mine, and that is to ramble on without ceasing. I think it is a fault most known to printers. You see, we find an open space and we have to put words into it. But I know you have joined me, perhaps with curiosities and questions of your own, and I should very much like to extend the conversation to you. Mrs. Pittman is here to assist me, and Madam, I shall turn the conversation to you then.
Yes, there have been several people, Mrs. Rind, who have questions for you, but I have to ask, Madam, did you get the contract?
The question is, did I receive the contract for public printer? If you will allow me a moment to drop humility in any form, I will answer it. Yes, I did receive the contract for public printer. There were 4 other men, as I said, who put forward that contract, but I did receive it, and to drop all humility, I will say that I won the vote by a majority of the House, 60 votes. Now I shall go back to being humble, Madam. But it is something that I am very determined to continue to fulfill with the best of my abilities, to print every public document that is handed to me without alteration, without opinion, and of course to do it very well. And of course the money that comes with the contract is not so bad either.
Kimberly asks, did you experience any backlash from patrons for being a female printer? And what about from other males in the industry?
Interesting. Madam, thank you for your question, Kimberly. Have I received any commentary from patrons of mine on the fact of my sex? It is interesting, Madam, that you point that very specifically out. Printing, it is not a trade that is mostly worked at by women. There are women who do print. A very dear friend of mine, Mrs. Green of the Maryland Gazette, of course, is a printer. I have known her for quite some time. My husband was actually trained as a printer by her husband when we lived in Annapolis in Maryland. So Mrs. Green follows the press. There are other women who also follow the press, not only here within the colonies, but also over in England as well. But no, I have never personally had anyone said anything to me of any difficulty because I am a woman. I am now curious to wonder what Miss Kimberly has heard that I have not heard, which concerns me slightly. But I have also neither received any disrespect, I suppose, is a good word to use, from fellow printers. In fact, I have heard nothing but encouragement, or a lack of acknowledgement, I suppose, has also happened. It has just been business as usual. My husband was sick for quite some time, so I was corresponding with many fellow printers up and down the colonies for some time before he died. So I think they were quite used to the fact that I was corresponding with them and not my husband. So perhaps that assisted with it as well. I think it is also important for us to remember that within our society of Virginia, and I would assume the rest of the colonies as well, if you are not born to privilege, friends, you are born to work. And it doesn't really matter who the hands are attached to, male or female. If you must carry out a business to support yourself and your household, then you must do so. But an excellent question, madam.
Along those same lines, Mrs. Rind, Deborah asks, are there other female printers?
Thank you, Deborah, for your question. There are other printers. There is a man down in Charleston whose wife assists him in the press. We have corresponded with each other. Of course, as I mentioned, Miss Anne Catherine Green of the Maryland Gazette. She has been running that press since, I think, 1967 was when her husband passed. She's also Maryland's public printer, having recently been appointed to that post. And then, of course, everyone knows that before her death, well, I can't call him his wife, but Mr. Franklin's wife assisted him in some forms of his business as well. But then, as I mentioned, there are also women I know of over in England who are typesetters. So setting the pieces of type themselves and assisting their husbands in larger forms of businesses. Before my husband passed, most of my association early on in the years of our marriage was to do with accounting. So I imagine there are quite many wives who see to accounting as well.
There are several questions in regard to your husband and now your new state as a widow. Aaron has asked how long you were married to your husband, followed by John asks, how are you treated as a widow by the population?
I married my dear William in 1762, it was. I was 22 years of age. So I suppose someone who is much more clever at quick mathematics will do the math and sort that out. But nearly 10 years, or just over 10 years, our marriage was. I miss him very much. And as far as the second question, it is a bit of, it is difficult to step from one state of life into another state. I had so long been femme couvert, which is the legal term when you refer to being married. I had left off being femme sole trader, as I said, in my early 20s. And so I had become very used to being married. And when you are married, you are not a single person. You are two people connected, not only in business, but in the household, but also with your heart. And suddenly to have that person ripped away, it leaves a hole. How others have treated me, I think there has been a great deal of looks of pity. The first time I returned back to Bruton Parish, where I attend church, everyone's eyes over the back of the pews were filled with pity, and I hated it. Perhaps it was wrong of me to think so. Perhaps I should have accepted the fact that they felt pity for me out of the goodness of their hearts, but I hated it. I did not want them to look at me with pity. But that has ceased. I think there have been many people within the city who have done their best to assist me. Now that I am in a state of being the widow Rind, once more a femme sole trader. Mr. Nicholas in particular, I would say, has been the most helpful. As soon as my husband passed, he knew the great deal of financial distress I was under, and he was immediately determined to assist me in whatever way he could. So I would say I have received a great deal of generosity, hospitality, and kindness in my state now as a widow. I have not been ignored by any manner. But then how can you ignore someone who owns a newspaper and can print what she wishes? Perhaps I should not have said that. Forgive me. Madam, perhaps I better go on to a next question.
There have been several guests who have asked about your children. Denise in particular asks, how many hours a day do you have to work on the press? And who watches your children while you work?
Oh, an excellent question, Denise. They are a handful. As I mentioned, I have 4 of them. 3 boys, 11, 9 3/4, and any parent will understand why I must say 9 3/4, for he will pop out of somewhere and reprimand me if I do not get that right. And then 3 and 4, or 4 and 3. My youngest is Mariah. She is my girl. She's my reward for having made it through all the other boys. I spend a great deal of time in my accounting office. Not every day, you must understand, is spent actually printing. And to the actual printing, I have very little hand in it. I have a journeyman and my man, Dick, to see to the actual printing. But in my accounting office, reading letters is a great majority of my day. I would say at least 14, 15 hours of my day is spent some way in my accounting office or in my press room. Now, in between those times, of course, I'm seeing to my children as well. Both my press and my household are located beneath one roof. So as long as I can hear my children, I'm sure some parents amongst you will understand this, as long as I can hear them, I know they're not in too much trouble. But when I cannot care for them or watch them directly, my man, Dick, will see to them. He is trained to household duties as well as being trained to the press. And he has been with our family for quite some time. My husband brought him down with us from Maryland. And my oldest, my little Will, he is 11, and so he has just reached the age where he has more useful qualities, I shall put it that way. And so oftentimes he is charged with watching his little siblings. Chaos, though, madam, is what my house usually is like.
We've had several questions in regard to what you choose to print. Heidi has asked, as a printer, do you also write the news that you print? And Greg, then to follow it up, asks, do you find your own opinions and views make their way into your pages in what you choose to print or not?
Interesting. Well, thank you both very much for your question. The question first I will answer is, do I write for my newspaper? No, very rarely. You, my subscribers, do not pick up my newspaper to read my writing. And I suppose this in part answers your question as well, sir, of do my opinion enter into the pages of my press? I strive very much for it not to. For you do not pick up my paper to read my opinion. You pick up the paper to read other people's opinions. And this is usually how the content of my press comes. It is filled with letters. It is filled with advertisements, yes, but mostly letters, essays, things of this nature will fill up the first 2 pages. And it is mostly of opinion. We find ourselves in a time of enlightenment, do we not? Our gentlemen philosophers tell us to look at the world around us and to question it, but to question it like a child might question it, by taking hold of it and looking at it from every angle to truly understand it. This is what you expect from your paper. You expect to be able to read opinion and to be able to then put forward your own opinion. So the pages of my press should be open to you, my subscribers. Now, I will say, occasionally I must add something in to either explain a piece that has been put forward or a piece that perhaps did not have enough space for that week. But I will always endeavor to include my words in italics so that you will know what is my voice and what is not. I will also say this. Anyone might submit to the newspaper. They may do it anonymously, if they wish. But anyone might submit to the newspaper. I right now have upon my desk a poem that I am thinking of printing in a later edition this very month by a lady, a poem. So yes, but to answer the other part of that question, madam, if you will correct me if I am wrong, is does my opinion and my bias, I think was even the word, make its way into my paper? I suppose it must, for I think it would be folly for any of us to think that we all are biased, are we not? We are humans. And so occasionally it steps into the work that I do. But I will say that I endeavor to attempt to keep it out. That motto of my press, open to all parties but influenced by none, is meant several things. It is meant to remind myself that part of my paper must also not be influenced by me. But I must also remember who I am printing for. I am printing for Virginians. I am printing for the rest of the colonies. I am printing for the gentlemen who will vote me into office next year, hopefully as public printer. I am printing for the governor. They all have varying opinions. And so I must walk that careful line of printing a newspaper that is filled with opinion.
Chris asks, what is the biggest threat to your printing business?
What is the biggest threat to my printing business? I would say a lack of supply. That is always the largest threat to any printing press. I import everything, my paper, my ink, my type. I cannot be without those things. You cannot think of being a printer if you do not have paper, ink, or type. Could I make ink at home? Yes, I could, but I don't have time to do it. And the ingredients, I would need to import some of them. So it is much easier to import the ink already made up. This is what is concerning. The gentlemen Burgesses recently, having gotten themselves into a great deal of trouble with the governor and having been dissolved, they now are speaking of a non-importation agreement. This has happened before, yes, to great effect. But my concern is eventually they're going to say we can no longer import anything from England. And then where shall I get my paper, ink, and type? Where do these gentlemen think their ideals and words will be printed if I no longer have access to paper, ink, and type? So that, I would say, lack of supply is the largest threat to any printing press. Any other threat, sir, is imagined. We have not had difficulties in the printing since the Great Civil War that tore England apart. We have the freest press in the entire known world, and we have it because we are subjects of His Majesty the King.
Kevin asks, was there a criteria the Burgesses used to select the public printer?
Well, it is an excellent question, and I wish I knew it fully, sir, if I knew the criteria the Burgesses used to select public printer, because then I would make sure that I met it every single year when the petitions went forward. I do not know what they thought in their deepest hearts when they cast those ballots. I do know that two of the gentlemen who put forward their presses did not own printing presses. So perhaps that influenced the fact that they only received a few votes between them. Why they did not vote for Mr. Purdy or for Mr. Dixon, who owned the other newspaper here in the city, I do not know. I imagine some of them probably felt pity. I imagine some of them probably felt a bit responsible for the fact that they invited my husband here from Maryland all those years ago, back in '65, and now they have his widow and his children on their hands. But I think the majority of them, sir, looked to my former work and the fact that for the past 9 months, 10 months now, I've been serving not only as public printer, but as editor and owner of my own private newspaper, having printed many pamphlets and other private documents for many of the Burgesses themselves. I think they looked at my work as well.
Going along that last statement you made, Patricia has asked, is your press used to print things besides your paper? For example, recipe pamphlets.
An excellent question. Patricia, I believe your name is. Thank you for it. Yes, my press is open to print anything. If you wish to print anything, then I will gladly do so, as long as we can agree on a form of payment and how much. But no, pamphlets, certainly. Pamphlets of any kind. I will print, oh heavens, broadsides for some theatrical productions. I will print lottery tickets. I will print calling cards. I will print invitations for assemblies and such things. I print forms as well if you must need things to fill out. That is a great deal of public printing. Say, for instance, apprenticeship contracts or things of this nature needed for the courthouse, I also print. So no, if you pay me, I will print it. As long as it is not treasonous, I will print it.
William and Madeline have asked, if you've printed anything under the government contract yet, and what those might be.
An excellent question. William and Madeline. And William, I must compliment you on your name. My eldest son is named William, as was my husband, so I'm very fond of that name. Have I printed anything yet under this year's contract? In fact, I have. In fact, it might have been the last thing I printed for the gentlemen Burgesses before they were dissolved by the House, by the governor. It was called a call for fasting and prayer. It was a short document. I would say no more than 2 paragraphs. But it called for Virginians to mark the 1st of June as a day of fasting and prayer in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Massachusetts Bay, in Boston, and the fact that they are suffering now. I printed this document, I returned it to the House of Burgesses, and when they put forward this document, the governor chose to dissolve them, for they were acting not entirely within the authority that they possess. You see, to call for days of fasting and prayer is the prerogative of His Majesty the King, and as his representative here in Virginia, it is the governor. The governor does not sit in the House of Burgesses, so for them to call for this, one could argue they did not have the authority. Not only was it the first thing I printed for them, it was probably the last thing I will print for them for quite some time. It doesn't mean my contract is over. Rest assured, I made sure that that was not the case as soon as I heard the gentlemen were dissolved, but my contract is still in full power. Whatever I now print will not come directly from the gentlemen Burgesses until they are reinstated.
Don has asked, who is the most influential person you've ever met?
Oh, what an interesting question. I thank you, sir. Don, that is an interesting question. Most influential person whom I have ever met. I will answer this 2 ways, if you will allow me, sir. Influential to myself, and then perhaps influential to the public at large. I think this perhaps a good way to answer it. I will say the most influential person in my life. I would have to say it would be my father. My father raised me, and he gave me the education that I am now in possession of. He taught me a love of reading and a love of words. My father used to say to me when I was very small, and I did not understand it then, I did not, but he used to sit me upon his knee and he used to say, Clementina, read everything, whether you agree with it or not, because unless you read it, how will you know you agree or disagree with it? So that is perhaps the most influential person upon my life. But perhaps the most influential person upon the greater population whom I have met, particularly through most common circumstances, I would have to say, would either be, I think it would be our representative from Hanover, I believe it is now, Mr. Patrick Henry. Mr. Patrick Henry, between all of us, friends, and I hope that you will not allow this to stray too much further than our private conversation. But Mr. Henry has 2 levels of speaking. It is either loud or it is booming. And so every time he comes into my accounting office to pay for his subscription or to work out some bit of government business, my children always know that Mr. Henry is there. He is a very impressive speaker. But I would say that perhaps on this particular time, he's the most influential, sir. And of course, His Excellency the Governor. Now, I am not acquainted intimately with His Excellency the Governor. He knows my name as public printer. But I would say he is also the most influential person here within this city. What an interesting question.
Laura has asked several questions, but one question she has asked is, how many papers do you make each time you put to press? And Teresa then follows up with how often?
Excellent questions, ladies. I print once a week, usually on a Thursday is when we go to press. How many papers per pulling? I would say that I print enough for my subscribers and then usually a 100 or so over, for you never know when you might need some more. There's always some delicacy with printing as well, because not every single newspaper that you pull is going to be exactly what you wish. To have no extra marks, or to be too wet or too dry when you put it to the press itself. So sometimes you must print a few extra to have ones that I'm more than pleased sending out to my subscribers. The exact number of my subscribers, and I imagine you are thinking to yourself, Mrs. Rind, you are dancing around the question, and you're right, I am. Mr. Purdy and Mr. Dixon, who own the other newspaper here within the city, do not tell me how many subscribers they have, and so if you will allow me, I will not inform the public exactly how many subscribers I do have. What I will say is that I send my papers all over Virginia. I send them to the northern colonies and to the southern colonies as well. To my knowledge, I do not know if my papers travel over to England. They might, but I print for Virginia and the other colonies as well.
We have had several questions about your children.
Oh!
Mikhail wants to know, do you ever get time off to play with your children? And Laura, again, wants to know about your children's education.
Oh, excellent questions both. To the first question, do I have opportunities to find times of enjoyment with my children? I do. I make time for them, particularly within these past few months when it has been a difficult time for all of us as a family. Sundays usually is our day of rest, so I will always make sure I have time to spend with them. There are more than one occasion when I wake up not through only any natural decision of waking up, but from an elbow to the ribs, or perhaps a knee to the ribs, and there will be one or two of them jumping on the bed saying, "Ma, it is beautiful outside. Let's go catch frogs." And I am dragged by the hand off to one of the creeks. Their favorite is the one behind Mr. Hayes' cabinet shop, and then we will spend the morning catching frogs when I really ought to be doing something else. But if I go with them to catch the frogs, then the frogs stay in the creek and they don't come back into my house. This is what I have learned. Their education is something that is certainly important to myself. I imagine all of my children will enter into apprenticeships at some time. That will be the furthering of their education. My job as their mother is to make sure they have a secure foundation to be able to step forward into the world. So I am in the midst of teaching my oldest two sons reading, writing, counting, etc. My oldest is recently helping more and more in the press room. And of any of them, I think he is the one that has the mind most suited to being a printer. I would very much like to hand it over to him one day. He's still too young for that, one day. But no, I educate them myself when I have time. But as I said, they will most certainly, all of them, enter into apprenticeships, for that is how they will continue their education and gain a skill to then be able to provide for themselves, and if Providence wills it, for their families.
Linda asks Mrs. Rind, what do you read? Publications as well as books that inspire you.
Oh, what an excellent question. Thank you, Madam. Linda, what do I read? Well, I read a great deal of newspapers, which I know you perhaps are thinking to yourself, but is that for enjoyment? Or is it mostly for your business? It is a bit for both. There are some interesting things to be found in newspapers, particularly papers from the continent and from England as well. But no, my great love is poetry. I dearly love poetry. And if you could ask me a favorite poet, it would be as asking to choose one of my children to be the favorite. I could not do it. I will read all poetry, for I dearly love it. And the classics as well. But I read them in English. I do not read them in their original Greek or Latin. My father attempted to teach me Greek and Latin. I did not have the head for it. Reading, yes, but not in another language. So I will read popular novels as well. Pamela has been a recent favorite. I've enjoyed that one. So yes, Madam.
Chris has asked, back to talking about your paper, have there ever been attempts to censor your paper, Mrs. Rind?
An interesting question. I thank you for it, Chris. Has there been attempts to censor my paper? Not that come to mind. Have there been one or two times where a gentleman perhaps has stopped by my accounting office and said, "Oh, Mrs. Rind, I hear you might be in possession of some information. Are you really going to print that this week? Or perhaps you might wait." Certainly that has happened. Do I pay attention to it? It depends upon the circumstances. But I cannot think of any overt attempt to keep myself from printing. As I said earlier, we have had very little trouble in regards to silencing or curtailing the press in any way. We as Englishmen know our freedoms. We hold them very dear to our hearts as well. And as a subject of His Majesty the King, I know what my rights are as far as printing goes. And as long as I do not print outright slander or outright treason, then I'm well within the realms of law. Now, no one prints outright slander because it is not good business. I am speaking of it as a businesswoman now, not necessarily as a reader. But if I print something that other people know is not right or is slanderous, then no one is going to continue to buy my press. So why would I do that? Treason, of course, is defined as calling for the downfall or the death of His Majesty the King outright. I will not print that. Speaking against Parliament, friends, is not treasonous. They were not elected by God, they were elected by men. So we might print our disagreement with Parliament all we wish. But as far as the curtailing of the press, no. Now, is it within the rights of the governor? Could Lord Dunmore at some point read something within my press and say, "I do not agree with this, I disapprove, I do not wish this printed. You will go down to Mrs. Rind's house and you will confiscate her press." Is he within his rights to do so? Yes, he is. Would he? I highly doubt it. Partly because he would have to explain why. It is a legal matter. He would have to explain why he would be confiscating that press. And secondly, friends, do you think he would confiscate the press, which is the only support of the widow Rind, who has 4 children depending upon her? Madam.
Serena asks, what would you say is the hardest part of taking over your husband's printing press?
My goodness. Thank you, Serena, for your question. The hardest part of taking over my husband's printing press. This may surprise you as much as it surprised me, for I had prepared myself for absolutely everything. My husband was ill for quite some time before he passed, and as he stepped further back from the press and I stepped further closer to it, there was an easy exchange. So easy an exchange, friends, that the day he died, I printed and put out a newspaper. So I was fully able to conduct every piece of that part of the business. The accounting I had held in my hands since the beginning of our marriage. The supervising of our journeyman and my man, Dick, was very easily learned. I had worked shoulder to shoulder with my husband for some years in the press room. He had taught me to typeset in the years of our marriage. So the aspects of the business was not what was difficult at all. And even of the running of my household, I was used, that was my trade, the running of the household. I was used to that part as well. I think the thing that was hardest was doing it by myself. When you sit down on your bed in your chamber at the end of the day and you are used to turning to the person that you have given your entire heart to and half of your soul, and they are not there to hear you laugh over the fact that your children have brought home turtles and put them in the wash tub again, or listen to your frustrations over the fact that James has outgrown his shoes for the 3rd time in as many weeks, and I don't know how we're going to keep his feet shod, to the frustrations of how do I balance printing and my own private press? How do I appease but yet not appease the gentlemen in the House of Burgesses? And there is no one there to answer you. I have found always that my marriage was very much like the gears of a clock. My husband and myself, the public, the private, the printing business, the household, working together in utter harmony to keep methodical time and at certain moments in the day to produce beautiful music. But when one of those gears is gone, I have found myself very much like a broken clock. That has been the hardest part of taking over his business, is the fact that it is no longer his business, it is no longer our business, it is now just mine. I thank you for your question, madam.
One last question, Mrs. Rind, and then unfortunately we're going to have to end our conversation. Kendall has asked, did you ever imagine that you would one day become a newspaper printer? And what is your hope for the future, and what are you concerned about?
Kendall, I thank you for your question. Did I ever imagine when I was a small child that I would become the mistress of a press? No. It is funny how life brings you into certain circumstances. I did not even imagine myself marrying a printer, I'll have you know. Mr. Rind had to work very hard to capture my heart. But no, I never imagined to be a printer, but I'm very glad of it. I could not think of doing anything else. And what is my hope and my concern for the future? My concerns for the future are, of course, as with many things, to do with my family, but with my business and my household as well. We find ourselves, friends, in a time filled with turmoil, where it seems every day some new decision has been made in some far-off colony or across the ocean that causes us here as Virginians, but also as subjects of the king, to wonder and to question and to fear. That fear is never good for business, I think you can understand, but it is also good for my business, owning a newspaper. My hope, though, would be for the future that at some point, we might be able to look around us and be proud of who we find ourselves as Virginians. That soon, very soon, Parliament will look across the ocean and recognize that we are not foes or enemies or some far-off people to be oppressed, but that we are in fact who we are, subjects of His Majesty the King, Englishmen who have the same rights and liberties that they do. Woe be it to any man who stands between an Englishman and his liberty, even another Englishman. My last hope, though, I would say would be for my children, that they would be successful in life and they would grow and that someday I would sit and watch them running their father's and their mother's press. Friends, I thank you so much for being able to join me here today. The capital city is quiet, but we know that there are times that cause us to have to speak in this way of correspondence. And until the time that we can meet once more face-to-face, friends, I look forward to that time, and I am your humble servant, Mrs. Clementina Rind.